So, welcome to the Fantasy Week 1 LCS recap and what I learned this week. It was really interesting. It's my first week of playing, and hopefully, you'll learn a little bit from how my leagues went. Question of the day is: how did you do in your first week? Did you get a win or two, or did you pick all TSM players and lose horribly, like I did in one of my leagues? So, I want to show you a couple of the fun things that I guess happened this week. I picked, this draft is on my channel. Don't go check it out. It is a terrible draft. I picked Power of Evil first round. Don't know what I was thinking. That was the first draft I did, and I was just kind of getting used to it. Definitely a mistake, because I kind of got slaughtered in this one. Definitely got banned out twice. And yeah, I lost by like well over 100 points. So I knew pretty early on, like before even going into Sunday's games, that this one was a loss. But the other two, I was pretty sure I was going to win. I had good matchups going into day 3. And this was the really, really tight one here. You can say I only lost by 4 points. And going into the last game, I had Closer playing. And the other guy had Dardoch and FBI playing. So I figured, well, if 100 Thieves does well, then I'll get points for Closer, and he'll get points for FBI. I was pretty solidly ahead, like probably 40 points. And then they just had to go pick Talia, who I thought was going to be permabanned the whole week. I didn't think she was going to get through the ban phase, and so I didn't bother picking her for any junglers. Clearly, I was very off there. Lost all my points for Closer. That's like 80, almost 80 points there that I lost on Closer that week, and as a result, I lost by 4 points. But it was fun. Like, I probably wouldn't have watched 100 Thieves Dignitas, but I was slightly invested in it now, just because of fantasy, which was definitely fun. So I came away with 2 wins, 2 losses, split the week. But my teams are looking pretty good, I would say, in the first 3 leagues. That 4th league, Power of Evil, just really not a good first pick, and I'm thinking of actually switching them out, which I'll show you later. What I wanted to do this week to I want to start looking at stats to see how different pick strategies and how different drafting strategies were working well. So I will bring up the stats in the background here and hide the phone. So this is the fantasy stats for week 1. You can see here that I've got them sorted by lane. I've calculated the average, and then I've highlighted in green any players in that role who are above average, kind of to get a feel for what the most important role is to be looking at. The other way to do that is to look at the standard deviation. Now, if you don't know stats, the standard deviation is the average amount that each person is, or each stat is away from the average. So it's like a double average. So if the mean, the average is 70 in this case, standard deviation is 23. So the average amount away from the average would be 23 on either side. So that'd be like just under 50 and just over 90. And part of what this helps us understand is which roles are the most volatile, like that have the biggest difference in spread. And so when you look at the standard deviation, 23 for top lane and bot lane, support's not a very high standard deviation. Kind of saw that one coming. I don't think anyone was picking support's first round, except for Core JJ, and that probably wasn't the smartest first round pick anyways. But surprisingly, jungle was actually the one with the highest standard deviation. Now, part of that might be because Blabber is such an outlier. So if I take out Blabber there, or even give Blabber like 100 points, maybe he gets per round, the standard deviation goes much closer to what you'd expect, like around the top lane and bot lane. But of course, Blabber had an incredible week. People kept picking Camille no flash into him, and he capitalized on it. So I definitely don't think that, I think this will be an outlier as we look at multiple weeks over time. but I would say that junglers are actually much higher priority than top laners for sure. That's kind of how I was drafting. And I would say if you can get Blabber, it's probably worth taking him first round over anybody else. Yes, he obviously has the most points this week, but I think C9 will put up really good stats, and Blabber is kind of the heart of their team right now. Plus, we're in a very jungle-heavy meta, and I think that's part of what's making the jungle stats so strong. Other than that, I would say mid lane first pick is definitely the way to go if you can get one of those first few players, because I would take Demonte over Deftly, even though Demonte's fourth and Deftly's second, because the mid laners are getting more points at the higher ranks than at the lower ranks. Like the difference is bigger. And of course, each team's going to have one of each player. So it's not just about getting like whoever has the most points. It's about whoever has the most points more than the second place person, which in this case is definitely Blabber. So yeah, I would say definitely if you're going to do a draft, and I'm probably going to do one with a couple of my friends today or tomorrow, pick mid lane first and jungle second, because I think those two roles are definitely the most impactful. 80 carries across the board, like 80 carries in the actual league game are the most important, but because of that, they're getting a lot of points across the board. Like Stixxay on Golden Guardians doesn't have a great week. Golden Guardians has actually a terrible week stats wise, but when they are getting kills, Stixxay's getting them because it's going to be in a team fight and he's the one putting out all the damage. So I would say 80 carries actually aren't as big of a difference as you would think they would be. So that's the overall look at just kind of the team fantasy, the team stats by position. The other thing that I took a look at was how players ranked on each team. So now the players are split up by team instead of position. And I also wanted to see how much game time affected the outcome. And it'll be interesting to see how this trend continues. But you can see Cloud9 actually had the fastest games, but they're getting the most points. So they really did stomp this week. And they did have an easier strength of schedule. But I was expecting the longer game times to actually mean more points, which I think on the whole is true. And CLG would be the big outlier here. You know, CLG is in 10th place, but if you look at their players, like second best support, third best AD carry, second best mid laner. I know this is RJS, but I just put it as Pobelter because they swap out anyways. So I actually think that teams that will go longer are probably good investments if you can't get those like top two teams of, you know, C9 and TL would kind of be the two best teams for sure. Yeah, so 100 Thieves and CLG had the longest game times. Part of that was because of their massively long game against each other. But yeah, so these players, I would say, are pretty highly valued. Now, 100 Thieves was pretty highly valued in my eyes before looking at any of these stats. But the big outlier here is CLG. And it's not just because I'm a CLG fan. It's because if you compare them against like your fourth and fifth round picks, you could be getting someone from maybe FlyQuest, Golden Guardians, Dignitas, or CLG. That's kind of the four teams that you're going to be picking from at the end of the draft. Take those CLG players. Their games are going to go long. Their shot calling is horrendous, and so they're just bloody games, and it's a lot of points. So I think CLG will end up winning a few games here and there, but it's really not about the wins. The longer the game goes, the more points everybody gets. So that's something to keep in mind. So that leads me to a couple of takeaways from this week. Put away stats, put away phone. So takeaway number one is, I should bring the stats back up. Takeaway number one is that junglers were the most important this week. So like I said, I think jungle and mid lane are significantly more important than the other lanes right now. It just makes sense based on the stats, the higher standard deviation. And then the second thing is just how major picks and bans actually are. So make sure you stay tuned for my picks and bans video each week, so you can kind of understand what the new metas are coming up, because these picks and bans make a huge difference. And I'll show you, let's bring the phone back up here. So Yeah, like in this one, in this league here, like I lost 80 points basically on closer just by getting banned out. Um, and I picked Nidalee. No one even picked Nidalee in the game. So there was a few bans, but and then Perks getting banned out in that last game, like that would have been enough to put me over the edge. And then the other league where it really mattered for me was in this one here. You know, I got the bans on Reyes both times, and so I end up getting like over 100 points more with Sven than Reyes. Now Sven's obviously a better player than Reyes. There's a huge point spread there, but it's about 60 points, and I extended it to 100 just by getting a good pick there. So I think picks really, really matter for sure. And to finish off the video here, I'm going to give you each week I'm going to do a player to pick, and the criteria for these players are going to be good picks if your team is struggling and you need to make some changes. So oftentimes these are going to be the weaker players who are potentially free agents in your draft. Like I could tell you each week to pick Sven and Vulcan, but most likely they're already taken. So I'm kind of looking at the lower teams and picking out someone who has a good schedule coming up and potentially has really good stats going into this week. So the players to pick for this week, if you can, if he's available in your league, it's Pobelter. Now the reason I say this is because if you did your draft closer to Friday, there's a really good chance that Pobelter's left up because there was these rumors, and then like we knew that he was getting subbed, and people weren't sure about how well CLG was going to play. But I think like I said, CLG players are definitely players to pick up right now if you want to replace like a 4th or 5th pick on your team. So like if you know the guy I just showed you there had Reyes that I was playing against. If Wild Turtle was up, I would take him 100% over Reyes for sure. Now that seems like an obvious one because Wild Turtle's so good, but across the board, I think CLG players, especially their mid lane, good to look at. And the bonus is, if Pobelter doesn't play, you still get RJS's stats. So that's my player to pick. And then the second thing I'm going to do each week is a best next week. So I'm going to take a guess at who the best stats are going to come from this week. And the way that I'm going to determine that is by like percentiles almost. So how much better they did than the average support or average AD carry. Because if I just look at total number of points, it's going to be like a mid laner or a jungler each week. So this week obviously was Blabber. Blabber had the biggest spread. He was the highest ahead of second place by far. And so if I had to guess for next week, I'm going to say that I think it's going to be potentially Alfari or Sven. I'm giving you those two picks. I think TL has a really easy strength of schedule, and Alfari was the best player on their team. Like in terms of ranking, he was fourth. He was the 4th best top laner. Everyone else on TL was below like 6th, 7th, or 8th. So I think Alfari has potential to really pop off in stats this week. But the one caveat I would say to that is because they have such an easy schedule this week, I'd be maybe a little careful about that, because if they completely stomp teams, maybe he doesn't get as many kills and you actually don't get as many points that way. But I'd say Alfari is definitely, I would say he's probably going to be one of the top performers next week. And then Sven as well. Sven has, C9 has a pretty easy schedule, but one of their easier games is against CLG, who looked decent until they didn't, right? And they were giving away these huge throws. So I think for an AD carry playing against CLG, there's the potential to get a huge amount of points because you're often not dying as CLG gets ahead and builds their lead. CLG throws it away, and Sven's cleaning up all the kills. So I would say Sven and Alfari are probably my two guesses for who will be the best next week. Hopefully that's helpful. Remember to subscribe so that you can stay tuned for my pick ban video coming up later this week before the games start. And comment down below how your first week of fantasy went. So signing off for now.